Real people having real conversations. Let's go beyond the surface and find the pieces of the past that make people who they truly are. This is the Blueprint Banter. Welcome to the show. Well, this is the Blueprint Banter podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lyons. This is Rich Bales with Philip Stafford Group, Insurance Group.
Yeah.
I think we just kind of get started on how you got into, becoming an insurance agent. Not oftentimes are you talking to a kid in high school and asking them, where they see themselves in 10 years. And they're like, I'm going to be an insurance agent,
Yeah.
And likewise with getting into construction for me. So in a nutshell, I guess, how did you get into that game?
Yeah. So I've got the classic route of thought I was going to go to medical school, rolled into 10 years of med device sales, rolled into real estate investing, and then naturally landed in insurance from there. So I think every person I've ever talked to about insurance has done something completely irrelevant to it.
Yeah.
And then stumbles their way into it.
Was it a personal connection thing that got you into it, or?
So it was honestly, I had been in med device long enough where, it was a really successful career where a lot of people would stay there a long time. But as I started thinking, not so much short term, but long term, like, hey, I'm having kids, I got a wife. All of a sudden, what does travel look like? What's it look like when I retire? All these things, and I was like the classic reading Robert Kiyosaki books, like, okay, well, the day I stop working is the day my income stops.
Yeah.
And that sort of freaked me out. So I was like, I need to come up with like a long-term plan for this. And the real estate side of things also opened my eyes to like, hey, there's a ton of tax benefits of being your own entity, all of these things. So I started looking into, I was like, hey, maybe being a real estate agent, if I'm going to buy properties, maybe that makes sense. But I had been in a quota-based job for a really long time, and I was just kind of burnt out on like, January 1st hits and you're back to zero. Yeah. So that kind of wiped that out for me. And then my father-in-law is a financial advisor, and he started talking to me about like residual income, things like that. And as like silly as it is, I was literally just looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, no shot I invest money with this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I said, nope, like not going to be a financial advisor. And I kind of told him that. And then he said, you should consider insurance because the business is structured that same way.
Yeah.
So I said, all right, like I'll look at it. Sounds like the most boring job in the world, but let's explore it. So I started looking into it, and it wasn't that it was this like sexy career, right? Like I tell somebody at a party, like, oh, what do? I'm in insurance. And it's immediate like, ooh, insurance guy, right? But the business makes sense to me, and the verticals that you can build around the business of insurance make sense to me. So that was what attracted it to me. And then eventually, I started interviewing with different places and just figured out like, I'm not really somebody who's wired to like have a thumb on me, work for somebody else. And so it's kind of how I ended up where I am.
I like the, that thought of, hey, there's more to this life than just me now, with kids on the way, whatever. That whole scenario definitely changes things. I think the looking after, you're done working part is interesting too. I think in my 20s, I didn't look to the future hardly past like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I still try to mainly keep my focus short term just because I feel like fundamentally if I'm doing the right things now, then things will pay off later. However, making sure you're in the right vehicle for that is super important.
Right.
So,
and that was the thing that like, I was in what I think would be considered like a fairly like high income career, but there's such a benefit to having something you can pass on, right? Where it's like this snowball can continue to roll downhill for, really forever, as long as somebody doesn't fumble it.
Yeah.
So just that thought to me kind of gave me like peace of mind, knowing that it's like, there's something to pass on or something to sell at the end or whatever it is. Whereas, with just your corporate job, it was like, look, man, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, like poof, gone.
I think when Showtime really got like the wheels were rolling, things were moving on the roofing side of things, that was kind of, I can relate to that because Sean and I were looking at it as, in that world, you kind of live and die by the next sale.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do a siding, gutters, roof, whatever, that transaction's done. And now you have to go find the next transaction.
Right.
and there really wasn't any long term or anything we were working for today wasn't going to pay dividends later on. It's just how much money can you bank up, and then even then, what are you going to do with it, right? So
Yeah.
no, I love that mindset for sure. The other thing vertically is interesting too, just because if you are on the real estate side of things, or if you're active in that industry, and then did it help you kind of getting a better understanding of the insurance side of things? Or, I mean, how did those two work together?
So, I mean, where it worked out well is selfishly. So I had a background of investing in real estate. And for me, the biggest challenges for any investor in real estate is like building your team, right? So coming up with, where's my financing come from? Who are the agents that make sense? Where do I find off market deals?
Yeah.
How do I structure all these things? How do I generate capital? Stuff like that. Whereas now, every single day I'm dealing with all of those parts, right? So with me having, half of my book being built working with business owners who own construction companies, who own, tech companies, working with mortgage lenders who are sending me their deals to, help home buyers with their insurance, with bankers on construction loans, doing builder's risk policies, like all of a sudden now my entire network is that team that was such a challenge to build, right? So when I decide, hey, I'm ready to delve back into the investing side, it's like now, like my entire world is those people.
You have the Rolodex there.
Whereas before, I think that's the majority of people's challenges. So, whether that's diving into single family stuff or saying like, hey, let's take down some big multifamily deals. Now I've got access to all the right people to make that happen in a much more expedited fashion. So
I want to dive into this actually just while we're here. I mean, let's just get into the meat and potatoes of it, because Mike Rowe said at one time, a big advocate for trades, and in our world, super relevant, from the dirty jobs thing and whatever. And one of the things he talks about when he went down that journey of dirty jobs and then getting involved with trades oriented programs for kids and whatever was, it's not necessarily about following your passion, like from your youth or whatever, but it's finding something to become passionate about.
Yeah.
I think your approach, it's obviously very calculated. I don't think often enough people do that to the depth they probably should. I mean, for you to understand that, hey, I'm getting into the insurance game, I'm selling policies, I'm helping bring value to my clients, whatever, but I'm also creating this network. Was that something that like happened naturally kind of as you got into it, or did you know right from the get-go, hey, these relationships are things I'm going to need elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think I recognized it. I committed to myself when I started this that I was like, hey, I'm going to build this company to be somewhat on autopilot at some point before I dive back into anything else.
So you had
right?
clear intent.
Like I'm a big believer in, like, for a period of time, keeping the main thing.
Yep.
Which I'm still in that. So, but also knowing that, like, hey, I've got this background in investing, I understand it to a deeper level than maybe your average insurance agent does.
Right.
Having that experience. So, with that, it allows me to create value within that community. And I think it just organically kind of happened, but also had that vision, right? So, I think, and you can speak to this too, is as a business owner, we're all challenged with finding how do we differentiate ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. Because at the end of the day, how many roofing companies are there in Des Moines?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can hit a 5-iron and hit building of
many
of them.
Same thing with insurance agents, right? Like insurance agents are a dime a dozen. So if my value is built on, hey, a cheap policy, hey, a quick quote, it doesn't matter if it's me or if it's the next guy down the street. Right. But if all of a sudden I go, hey, I can fully underwrite an apartment complex sale because I know everything there is to know about purchasing an apartment complex and what you might run into.
Yeah.
My conversation with you as an investor is completely different than the guys like, yeah, I can write an apartment complex, I'll do it cheap, right? And I can talk about looking at your cap rates and like how the market's shifting and stuff like that. So just having that mindset, I think, allowed me to delve into those relationships that I'll use later a little bit more.
Let's dive into that some more then. So you decide you're going down that road, you have these other things going on. So now we have to say, did you take over a book when you started, or was it okay? So 100% from scratch.
Yep.
So now you're kind of here, and it's like, all right, how am I going to be different? What is my approach to the market? Was it did you just kind of take a I guess, like the pulse of the landscape around you and like, okay, this is what these guys are doing? Did you have somebody that you sort of saw doing things well, like elsewhere in the country, or how did that whole thing
Yeah.
go?
So interestingly enough, I found it really difficult to find any sort of like mentorship or guidance when it came to like the actual insurance community.
Saw a lot of people you didn't want to do business
Yeah,
like probably,
yeah,
but
I saw a lot of
yeah,
that, and honestly, even the ones I tried to reach out to, it's like just like not an industry that, like meshes. Everyone's
okay,
very much like stiff arm, like I don't know. It's as I look at different industries, there are some industries that are like very like abundance mindset, like let's all pull each other along, let's grow. Insurance seems to be very much like a scarcity mindset. Like everyone is like, we don't partner up on things because we're competition.
gotcha.
And
I wouldn't
don't get me
guess
wrong,
that.
I'm like hyper competitive, but I'm also of the belief that like there's so much business out there. Like I'll tell you every secret I have, and if you're willing to take it and run with it and work it, like I believe 1% of people will do that anyways. So
Yeah,
it doesn't bother me. But my approach was, I think in anything, activity leads to production. So
yeah,
I set out within my first 12 months, I wanted to average one coffee a day, whether it was a business owner, a mortgage lender, financial advisor, real estate agent, whatever, just people who are in front of people. And I asked a ton of questions. Where's value created by your current insurance agents, right? Like what do they do? And over again, the answer I got was, well, he gets me cheap rates or he gets me quick quotes. And it just kind of, it just struck me as
like
like,
cliche stuff.
like, is that it? Is
Yeah,
that really all we can be doing? And so then I started asking them, like, okay, well, like, where's the focus in your business, right? And virtually across every business owner, entrepreneur, whatever it was, it all boiled down to like customer experience
yeah.
type stuff. So as
So it's
I,
like, well, you mentioned those things before, but that's not really what you're telling me now that we actually have a conversation.
yeah,
Yeah.
so just pushing people, and then also like you'll come to find like I'm pretty like blunt with questions. Like I kind
I
of
love
I
that.
like to like feel a little squirmy and awkward
Yeah.
in a question. So I'd ask people like, okay, like for realtors, like one of my favorite ones, like, okay, there's 2,700 realtors in Des Moines. If I'm buying a house, why you?
Yeah.
And 99% of people think that's a rhetorical question. So we end up with like a 20-second, like, no, seriously, why,
Yeah.
why you? Right. And so
Yeah.
like to like really pinch somebody on that made me go, okay, if I'm going to ask that question, I need to know it. And so for me, I said, look, my goal isn't just cheap. It isn't just quick. It's, I want every client I work with, whether it's a business, whether it's a person, to understand, to be educated, to feel empowered, to all of a sudden go like, man, I got this video from Rich that walks me through line by line by line of what this is and what's actually covered so that we don't ever run into this
Yeah.
issue a year down the road. Like, man, he didn't even tell me that.
Especially in that space too. I mean, yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And most business owners, regardless of the industry, have no idea what their policies are really covering, what is appropriate coverage. I mean,
Right.
you can go insurance broke, right? We have that
Yeah.
conversation all the time. And so it's like, you know, this you can easily get sold things that you don't need
100%.
if you don't understand it good enough. So I
Right.
love that approach.
And so and that was what I like wrestled with is like, in talking to these people who were consistently sending out referrals for insurance, I was like, what does that look like for your client, right? What are they getting? And as I pressed people, most of them didn't know.
Right.
Two, when they did dig into it, it was literally just an email with something attached to it, right? And like, I guarantee you, I could send you a binder on a work comp policy, and you're going to sit and go, looks good, Rich.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. I don't read a whole lot.
Right?
So
And
yeah.
like no one does
Yeah.
because it wouldn't make sense if you tried.
Right.
So that's where it was so crucial to me. I'm like, hey, I could record a 2-minute video that highlights when it's used, how much it is, what your options are. And all of a sudden you're going to have that and go like, man,
So are you attaching that video to prospects then when
e-
you're in the initial
every
conversations?
single quote, every single person that gets a quote from us gets a video walking them through it line by line.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. And so like here's the next level of that is not only does that educate every person, whether it's, individual business, whatever, it's something they can go back on,
Yeah.
but it also gives me a chance to highlight where it came from. Right. So, if I look at it and go, hey Derek, thanks for sending this over to me. I'm gonna get them a video tomorrow. I can be like, hey, just FYI, you're working with the best roofer I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I genuinely appreciate the partnership with him because now all of a sudden they're hearing it from a separate professional that's like, man, I must have hit the jackpot with this guy, right?
Yeah.
So it gives me a chance to highlight our referral partners, stuff like that.
Okay.
and then tag them within our system long term for our drip campaigns. Say like, hey, if I ever get contacted by this guy, who's thinking about moving again, well, are you building? Perfect.
Right.
I know a home builder.
Yep.
So just doing that stuff makes it much more scalable
Yeah.
than it would be if I was waiting for an hour-long conversation at the end of the day as people get off the phone, stuff like that.
Were there, did you have peers, I don't know how involved, I guess, industry wise, if most people are kind of closed off, like maybe it isn't as collaborative as others, but did you have people when you first started doing that, like this Rich Bales dude, he's sending videos with every quote, like what's this about? Or, I mean, did you get any pushback from people?
Honestly, like I get zero industry feedback because the industry is so closed off.
That's crazy to me.
Which is, yeah, it's wild because in my head, like at the end of the day, like I just want to meet up with hustlers, right? Like if you're in the same industry as me, if there's 500,000 people in Des Moines, like the odds of us like pursuing the same one very often, probably pretty slim.
Yeah, our industry is, I laugh all the time. I don't want to get like all the way into the Showtime Homes thing, but it is interesting, the thing that I guess people hang their hat on. I laugh a lot about the people that pride themselves in just the the tactic of putting, wood together with nails.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, you claim that you pound nails better than anybody else, but most of us are using the same subs and vendors.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
we're using Klein Electric just like you are.
Yep.
So to your point, differentiating yourself, it is important, but you have to find out something else that's going to make it tick. You can't just say like we have the best policies, because it's like, well, you're an independent agent. They can sell the same policy.
Yeah,
technically,
exactly.
right? So what is that difference and what does it look like? But I don't view any of our competitors, in our market as adversary. I mean, we can collaborate, work together. They probably have things they've learned along the way that can help me, especially, I mean, I'm young, right? Like I have a
100%.
lot to learn. So
Yeah.
but I think it's on us to know the pool of people that we're trying to fill our pipeline with.
Yep.
I think anybody else that builds with a different builder in this market, that was just on us for not having that relationship.
Yep.
Like,
100%. So yeah, I think as I continue to grow, it's, that's an ever evolving, like answer to that question of differentiation is ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you stop differentiating, you die.
Mhm.
And it's in just this short time, like we're obviously going through this chaotic insurance market. So
Wow.
it's forced differentiation, but
Yeah.
it's also really separated, the best from the average.
Yeah.
So, it's either an opportunity or it can crush you.
Rough market times, they weed out the inefficient people.
Yeah.
So if you were kind of just sitting on your laurels and doing the same thing for the last 30 years in the insurance game, it probably isn't working very well.
No. Which, yeah, I mean, for the ones who are adapting and adjusting, it's created this massive opportunity.
Has and I don't know how much you want to get into necessarily, the 1%, 2%, 3% deductibles,
Yeah.
wind and hail, things are changing. We don't have to dive into the weeds of that, but with the landscape of carriers not insuring, older properties, and all these things, by the way, make sense in the market to me.
Yeah.
But with that stuff happening in the carrier world and them sort of wising up, I think, to the game, is that creating more turnover with clients within brokerages or?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's especially when you start talking about like commercial property, you think about like apartments, large commercial buildings, HOAs, things like that. It went from a market that every company wanted because it was high premium, fairly low risk, to all of a sudden we have this shift of a hail belt over, Iowa, that now all of these companies are like, no, we want nothing to do with it. So it's really narrowed the market down into like, okay, who's actually going to compete for this? And now it's gotten much more picky as far as like, all right, if you're an HOA, you need to have reserves.
Yeah.
Right.
Which almost
none do. So, that's another piece to my business now where it's like, I'm not just focusing on how I differentiate myself. I'm saying like, hey, when you get me, you get my network too, right? So I'm partnering with property management who specialize in helping turn around HOAs to say like, hey, this is how we build reserves. This is how we do a reserve study. Here's my lawyer who will help you rewrite your bylaws to protect you guys to make sure you have loss assessment coverage.
I hadn't thought about that part. Obviously, that's why you're here, because you know your game, right?
Yeah.
But that's another part that's always interesting is a lot of times these HOA presidents are just, maybe a retired guy that he just happens to be kind of more available than
Yeah.
some of the other people
It's
that are
like
maybe more
volunteer
busy.
work.
But yeah, but they don't have any, in no disrespect to whoever that may be, but a lot of these people just don't have the wherewithal necessarily to know what should our reserves be. Like
Right.
they're just kind of, going through the motions until an event happens.
Right.
And then they're like, oh no.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's been good for me because it does give me the opportunity to sit everybody down and go like, all right, like, here's the reality of your situation. And it also lets me weed out the ones that I know just aren't going to be worth the time. Because if I'm like, at the end of the day, if the only thing you care about is price on this,
Yeah.
I'm probably not willing to write as skinny of a policy as maybe the guy down the road.
And that's okay. We
And
just don't
that's
have to do
fine.
business.
And I can weed that out pretty quick where I go, hey, if I'm going to present this, if I'm going to quote this, take the time to like dive into all this, I'm going to sit down with everybody and we're going to talk through this because I know you don't know how to read an insurance policy. And if all you're doing is having 6 people email them to you, what's the one number everybody knows on a quote?
Yep.
Price.
You got, you have a quote for a Chevy Cavalier over here and this one's for a Cadillac.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They're not
so,
the same.
Especially now you talk about like 1%, 2%, 3% deductibles, on a $15 million property, that's pretty substantial. Yeah. Right. So if an investor doesn't know what that looks like and all of a sudden it hails and he's got $1 million roof claim and his deductible is $500,000, there are a lot of people that are tapping out.
Yeah.
So that's where I can come in and go, hey, instead of doing that and tapping out, we could, for another 10, 15 grand, put like a deductible buy down policy in place. You can spread 10 grand across your rents in a 100-unit apartment complex. Yeah. Right. That's doable.
Yeah.
And now you're not bankrupt when hail hits.
I just heard the term buy down. So I was really glad that you were coming in today because I just had a conversation with a client that's been with me with the past 2 companies actually I was with before I started Showtime. We've had a working relationship for a long time, but they have a lot of USDA funded properties, Section 8, and their situations are always difficult because, money isn't there. They have to follow certain guidelines and stuff. But I just heard that buy down term in the insurance game for the first time this morning, having a conversation with them.
So. Yeah, it's becoming much more common just because the average I would say now on a commercial property is like 3% wind hail. There are a couple out there that are still at 2%. We got one company still at 1% for like the right fit. But all the large carriers are 2% all the way up to 5% now.
Is it a situation where you're paying a little bit extra and that's going into almost like similar to an HSA or something, and then it's making money and sitting there to help pay the deductible or not?
Not necessarily. So the way it would work is, let's say you've got a $500,000 deductible, right? So you're looking at 5% on this massive structure. So this deductible buy down policy, we could say, if hey, I can come up with $200,000 in the event of a claim, not $500,000. This policy would essentially cover $300,000 of that deductible in the event of a loss. So
it's like a supplemental.
Yeah, so you're essentially just making a policy that in the event of a claim is going to kick in for $300 grand and pay that. Gosh. So it's a smaller premium, for a 100-unit apartment complex, you're maybe paying $100 grand a year. For an extra 5 to 10 grand, I can buy that deductible down to make it like sustainable in the event I have a loss.
It's interesting.
So it's shifting from cost to value because I'm going, hey, this is going to cost you more money, but it's sustainable. It won't tap you out in the event of a loss. What are the odds you're getting hit by hail?
Yeah.
Pretty high.
Right.
So that's why I love this market at the same time is because it allows me to be more of a consultant.
Yeah, because there are losses that happen.
Right. And at the end of the day, like if you're somebody who's owning multi-million-dollar properties or running multi-million-dollar companies, it's not necessarily in your best interest to go find the cheapest thing out there, right? Yeah. So I jokingly tell people all the time, I say cheap insurance is expensive. Mm-hmm. And it's cheap until you have a loss, and then all of a sudden it's expensive.
And most of those people probably didn't get into that situation by, whatever industry or business they were doing before. And in order to be able to afford those properties, they probably didn't get there by just buying the cheapest of the cheapest anyway.
Yeah, right.
For whatever reason, though, insurance does sort of have that stigma of like, even when you need to use it, they're going to make it a pain in the butt. And so one of the things when I first got into the insurance restoration game with like roofing and siding and stuff was, and I created really good relationships with local adjusters and agents where everybody else in the game was like, no, the agents are just, they care about the carrier's money and they don't want their loss ratios to get hit. And, adjusters are just trying to, it's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
If you actually spend time to talk to these people, that's not necessarily the case. And so, especially on the multifamily game, it got to the point where it's, hey, we don't want to be filing claims frivolously just
No.
all the time for whatever. You and I actually talked about this a little bit when we first met, was just like, let's have a contractor go out and look at it first, make sure it is worthy of a claim.
Yep.
Make sure those dollar amounts do exceed deductibles, so on and so forth. But from a broad stroke, my thing was always, let's get together with your agent before an event happens and understand for sure, because as a contractor, we can't speak policy language or whatever.
Yep.
But it's like, let's just make sure you know how to take advantage of the situation you're in should something happen.
Right.
Now, because it's a contract, you're paying a price, and if the carrier needs to cover it, then they will. But you need to know how to, not take advantage or manipulate in a negative way, but just how to access that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just understanding your structure, right? And I think where insurance you speak to is like insurance has kind of got a bad name when it comes to this, and agents have a bad name. I don't think it's because of like any intentional wrongdoing. I think the market has just forced it to become commoditized, right? So when you're worried about like, hey, I'm feeding my wife and kids, when you get in a pinch, people get to the point where they're like, hey, I just got to win some business because I need to get paid.
Yep.
Right. So all of a sudden you're sneaking in a cosmetic exclusion or actual cash value on roofs.
Yep.
And, then when I go do a sit down with these people, I'm like, hey, just FYI, if you have a hail event, this is actual cash value on $1 million roof. Like, did you guys know that?
Yep.
And 90% of the time it's like, had no idea.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a product of a tough market. So that's why, like, for me, I'm so upfront in the beginning, like, hey, this is about value, not about cost, because if I commit to being a part of this race to the bottom, like that happens.
Yeah.
And I think as an industry, if we all kind of took this shift and said like, no, like we're going to be above it, but that's not real.
It's never going to happen.
So, but that's okay. I think as I grow and the brand presence grows and just reputation grows, I think it also weeds out the clients that I probably don't want to be working with anyways.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think really in any business, not just insurance, I think figuring out like where your value is and like how that pairs with cost. Cause obviously to a certain extent, at some point cost comes into effect. I can't be like, hey,
it has to make sense.
Yeah.
The market, it can't be out of market. We talk about that all the time. People are oftentimes scared to, maybe like with you, they're scared to let you know what they are currently paying with their current, person or whatever.
Yep.
With us, a lot of times people are apprehensive to give us their budget of what they want to be at for a build, because they're like, well, if I tell them 800,000, then they're just going to build me a $700,000 house and charge me 800.
Yep.
And I tell people all the time in like the very first discovery meeting, sort of like you, I'm blunt and honest, and just like, we cannot just build you a house and charge you way above and beyond market value for it. That's not how it works.
Right.
You have to have pre-appraisals with the bank. Your lender, whenever you do your final mortgage, is not going to just give you a mortgage that's $100,000 inflated.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to do our job and make sure we're within the market, but that we're bringing you value, and some things may cost more.
Yep.
So I think yours is probably very similar.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm always transparent with people, especially in like a review scenario, right? Where I tell them like, at the end of the day, if I review this and you're in the best spot you can be, I will be the first person to call you back and say, keep it.
This is awesome.
Write it out. Like it's not to say like, hey, I'll talk to you again in a year when it might make sense. But I have gotten just as many referrals out of those people where I'm like, you know what? It looks good. Maybe tweak this little thing, but like I wouldn't touch it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. So I mean, multifamily was a perfect one where there was a season of probably 9 months where I told everybody, like, if State Farm will write you, call State Farm. Now we're out of that phase again, but just that like brutal honesty with people was enough that they were like, wow, this guy's not just in it to make a buck. It's a long-term thing, right?
Yeah. Especially if they're in an older policy that they've had for a while it's crazy. Some of the deductibles, we still come across like $1,000 deductibles on, multifamily projects. That's like, wow.
Which I think like within the next year, they're all going to be like cycled out.
They're phasing, but
occasionally I see them and I'm like, hope it hails.
Just don't even call your agent. Hopefully he just forgets you exist for a while and this thing just kind of stays
like
out
you
there.
have a golden egg sitting right here.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yep.
No, I love that part of the game too. I mean, honesty is important. I remember I was working for a company years ago. I don't need to say the name, but I was always a big believer on if I could explain it well enough and we're both on the same page, then I feel good about the sale too. Because at the end of the day, I mean, there are, salespeople get a bad rap sometimes, whatever. Every transaction is a sale. So whether you think you're getting sold or not, you always are. But I always believed in that explaining up front and making sure people felt good about things. But there is a sales world out there where it's like, hey, just go sell.
Yep.
So I want to dive into that a little bit, especially since you started talking about coaching. But I had the owner of the company that I was working for one day. I was working with these older clients and he looked me dead in the face and he's like, don't educate, just sell. And I was like, that's probably fucking opposite of like anything you should ever hear.
Right.
And that was kind of my defining moment that I was like, probably not going to be with this company.
Like this doesn't align anymore.
But I mean, I could not believe that like he had the goal to even like just openly say that to an employee. And so there's different ways to go about it. But, as you try to grow your business, there are, you have to sell policies, right? And so like with your 2-market strategy now, you started working with a coach or you're going to start working with a coach you mentioned. What are some of the things that like, do you want to hone in your education part in craft in order to get?
Yeah. So I think the evolution of me has been, left this successful career, jumped into something from scratch and went, oh my God, I'll take anything. I'll take everything. I just need market presence. I want everybody to know who I am, what I do, and why I do it well. So it was very much a wide net being cast. Now, as I'm hiring out back-end staff, as I'm hiring salespeople, stuff like that, now it's navigating like, okay, how do I funnel this and leverage my output to make this more scalable, right? So the home and auto space is on its head right now, but we've got the education piece dialed in. We've got the systems dialed in where it's such a streamlined process that somebody calls in, we get the info, it's into our CRM, it's following a pipeline, it's presented with a video, the next day, and it's all very well tracked. So now the challenge as we continue to grow is like, okay, how do we find the best people? Right? Because you got to get the right people in the right seats for anyone to succeed. So now I'm navigating like, okay, so the client education piece is dialed in. Now how is my onboarding the best onboarding, right? And the best training? Because, not only am I selling to customers, to the, business owners of the world, I want the best agents in Des Moines, in Chicago, in Omaha. So how is my education to that? What does that look like? So I'm building, that back end piece out as well. And then for myself to respect my time, kind of as the owner of this thing is going, okay, well, now where's my minimum? Like what's the bottom threshold of someone that it's worth me personally handling versus like passing it off type thing. And that's something had never really like explored until I told you I had that call and was, all of a sudden it's like, what, like realistically, I've got the ability to delegate this stuff. So there's got to be like a certain threshold where I pass it off, right? If I say like, hey, if you're not a business owner of a company of 10 or more, maybe I pass that to the next level. Or if it's below a certain premium threshold or whatever it is, I think that's the next evolution of, the Bales insurance team is like, who fits where, how do we make sure everybody's speaking the same language, following the same process, and that every client, regardless of, where you're at on this rung, gets the exact same thing, no matter who it is, whether it's me, whether it's, the people under me, whatever it is. So, so I'm definitely in this phase of like transitioning from being in it to working on it. And
does that feel natural to you?
Yeah. In my last career, a big piece of what I did was developing a team, and I love that.
Kind of always been systems oriented to a certain
Yeah,
extent.
I'm very systems processes oriented. I just love like the development of people. And I think that's partially why like I tend to prefer working with a business owner, is because a lot of
Yeah.
business owners are fighting that same fight.
Yeah.
So it's like if I can pour my systems over and be like, hey, FYI, this is something I'm doing like within my own business that's helping me grow or helping me get through these hard things. Like it doesn't matter if it's a roofer, if it's
Yeah.
a tech company, like what it is, we are all navigating these like same challenges.
Yeah.
So it's just satisfying for me to kind of meet people where they're at on that.
See, I think that's one of the things I think that's helped us too in the part of branding that I don't think I understood to the full extent when I first got into it was and I've talked about it before, but with Showtime, like it was natural to me and I'll tell you some other time just kind of how that whole thing like came about or whatever. But once it started gaining traction of its own beyond Derek Lines, then I was like, oh, I did it. I was more or less like, hey, this is just who I am. We get things done. We hit problems head on. Like it's showtime. It was never like showtime, like
Yeah.
fancy stuff. It was just this is what we do. This is how we do it. Boom, boom, boom. Right. Um, but what I think happened that I didn't really think about ahead of time was the fact that you're you're always your brand's out there for clients, but also to the people that are going to come on board with you.
Hmm.
And you're creating essentially a real culture vicariously just through the branding that you're doing to try to get clients. And so when I started having people reach out to me and like, hey dude, like are you hiring or whatever, and it's like, no, not right now, but like, oh my gosh,
Should
in
I
a
be?
world where in a world where everybody talks about how it's hard to find good people and young people don't want to work anymore. I mean, you just walked in, you saw three people under the age of 25 that are grinding,
Right.
like,
Yep.
and they're very good at what they do. And so I just don't believe any of that stuff
Yeah.
anymore because I firmly believe if you create a brand, have something that you're actually doing intentionally, that people are able to follow that and adhere to it.
Yep.
So
Yeah. And it's, speaking to that, like you hear that same thing, like it's so difficult to find skilled people. The more difficult I make the interview process, the more people on, the better people I've
yeah,
gotten in both careers I've been in,
yeah,
where I learned early where it's like, med device was this way, really insurance, just because the business is the way it is. It's really easy to paint a really pretty picture on
yeah,
like, this is what long-term could look like.
like
And,
dangle carrots.
and I mean, I could get people being like, yeah, done. I'm in.
Like,
You
babe, I'm
sold.
gonna be making 2 mil next year.
Yeah. Right. Like
Yeah,
it's so easy to paint that picture.
right.
But what I've figured out is like, I'm going to make it ugly.
Yeah,
I'm going to make it sound like the worst job in the world.
yeah,
And those people that are willing to be like, I'm in, I'm all in, they're going to show up and be like, this is way better than he said, and be excited and be, willing to work that 18-hour day in the beginning to go like, look, I want it bad. So,
mhm,
I just had a guy start last week, and in the interview process, I literally told him like, you need to come up with a number that will make it so you don't starve. And we'll do the math to figure out how to get you there. Cause there might be a couple years where you're doing that.
yep, yeah. No,
And
no,
that's the reality, is like, it is 100% of what you kill. So like there is that chance,
yeah,
but I also know like if you follow these systems and processes, it's not going to be a problem.
yep,
So just, I like to put somebody on that spot and just see what they're made of a little bit. Right.
the
Cause there are some people who go like,
expectations
Rich, like, I don't think I'm your guy.
are
And
right.
I would rather they say that then than a
Yeah,
year in and be like, man, I'm tired. I'm done. I
yeah.
didn't think it'd be hard. Right. So now if I'm up front and I'm like, dude, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, they're in. They're
It's
all in.
also like so much more fun or even more rewarding when you get a year down the road and they kind of made it through those dark 2-3 months early
Yeah.
on and
Yeah.
things start picking up and you start seeing the lights in their eyes and it's like, see, we talked about it.
Yeah.
You made it through. Like
Yep.
things are starting to take off now. It's more rewarding at that time because it's like we knew this was gonna suck for a while.
Right.
Together.
And it's good for it to suck. Right. So
Yeah.
I had somebody give me this example the other day. So they said, have you ever seen somebody who's won the lottery go broke? I was like, yeah, of course. And you know why that is? And I didn't know why. It's because you skip steps.
Yeah.
Right. So like if you don't go through that, like that struggle, that pain, that push, you don't know what to do with it once you're there. You don't know how to maintain it. You don't know how to
Yeah.
sustain it, all of that stuff. So I think it's so healthy, especially when you're developing young people, to say like, look, we're going to go through some tough stuff. You're going to grind. You're going to do some stuff that makes you really out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
But then once you start succeeding, you start getting that momentum and stuff like that, you're prepared for it.
Do you think that, because I agree, one of the things that I definitely don't have figured out is how do you get, we sort of had to do it out of necessity, I guess, starting whatever business that we're in, or whoever may be starting their own business today. You don't have a choice. So my thing was always like, there's no such thing as plan B.
Yep.
Like Showtime, it has to work.
Burn the ships.
My kids are invested in it. They like wearing bracelets that say Showtime. They like saying it's Showtime.
Yep.
My fiance is on board with it. You start having friends that are buying into the brand, and it's like once that thing starts like going down the runway, we're not shutting the plane down.
Yep.
Like we're going.
Yep.
And we're going all the way to the moon. Like there's no stopping, right? So that's how we feel, but there is a certain shift that I've noticed as more people come on the team. I think we do a good job of motivating, but it is sort of hard of like, but I also can't expect you to necessarily operate as I did to the full extent of it.
And you never will. And that's like the hardest thing as a business owner to commit to is like, no one's ever going to care as much as you do. Right. But they're also not going to see the upside the same way you will. Right. So it's like, that's like the give and the take is like, how do I set expectations properly and keep you excited to the extent that you accomplish like what our mission is, right? Right people, right seats. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing I had to navigate previously where I was like, my previous career, there was more like tiers of people and stuff like that. And it was always so obvious if somebody wasn't in the right seat, right? Like you can't always take like your best sales dude and toss him in a manager position because all of a sudden motivation's gone. And he's like, I don't want to answer calls and train people. I just want to go close. Right. And that's okay.
They oftentimes suck as managers.
Yeah. Right. And a guy who's terrible at sales might be a great manager.
Right.
So yeah, I think, as the person calling the shots, like the onus is on you a little bit to like figure out like, where do we put these people so that they're happy? Like what makes them happy? Because everybody's not chasing a dollar. There's some people like, you know what? I want to be done at 5 and I want to go home and live a stable life.
Our in-house designer just got excited because our dishwasher got fixed in our office. It's like all the things, dude, you've been here a year and 22 days and the most excited day is because the dishwasher got fixed.
Yeah, right.
So you never know. But it's funny. Everybody's motivated by different things and that is kind of on us to figure out, what it is that makes people tick. So, all right, let's talk about the suck and the struggle a little bit. Growing up, like was there defining moments that you would say you can look back on and it's like, hey, I told myself at 8 years old that, I was going to live a certain way or do a certain thing or?
Yeah. So, I think I had probably not all that unique of a childhood where, grew up, had parents divorced really young. With that led to quite a few financial struggles, things like that. And I think when you're young, I was young enough, I didn't even recognize it. It just kind of was what it was. It wasn't until I was probably more like middle school, high school when I started to recognize like, man, I guess I'm not like everybody else with what's going on. So I grew up in Pella, which was like a fairly wealthy community. So being on the low end of things where it's like, man, nobody else is out of lunch money. Like that's interesting, right? So those were the things that I think molded me internally to go like, there's no way this will ever happen to me or my family. So, I started out, I wanted to be a doctor. And in hindsight, looking at it, it was like, I just wanted stability. I wanted to know that there was never going to be a point in time where money was my problem.
Yep.
And then that's obviously evolved into these other careers and stuff like that. But, things like that, things like, being able to be super involved in my children's upbringing, in their events, all of those things were like formed by this.
Just knowing like in remembering that sort of feeling that you had at that given time, like you kind of like David Goggins talks about like reaching the cookie jar or whatever. So like we find those moments from our past that sort of, I never want to say define us, necessarily, but it is something you can reflect on. Like, hey, I didn't like the way that felt.
Yeah, 100%. And there's just speaking this like brings up, these emotions of like embarrassment and, just awkwardness. It's funny. This is a story I've opened up to my wife about quite a few times, but I'll tell it now. Is like, I remember being in middle school. This was probably like financially our most difficult time, where it was like power on, power off, like hoping we could pay the bills. And I was always super involved in athletics. Yep. And I played on an AAU basketball team with a bunch of my peers. And after a lot of these tournaments, you know, I would just catch a ride with somebody because my mom was going to school, working a couple jobs, like just not able to go to a lot of these things. And we would go to like a restaurant, and I just remember this like haunting feeling of the waiter or waitress working their way around the table, asking what everybody wanted to order, and sitting there and having to be like, not hungry, because it just wasn't an option, right? And so just like those little things are the things that I think in the back of my head where it's like, it's 2:30 a.m. and I'm still working. I'm just like, no chance. Yep. No one,
you're
so
looking at your buddies, and their dad's like, oh, sure, get the chocolate shake too, like whatever, and and they're not even thinking about it.
They don't even understand what's going on, right? Like they have no clue, and nor should they.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was like, and eventually I think some people caught on where it was like, all of a sudden some funds would show up here or there, and it was like so blessed to have those people that like poured into me, but also just molded me into this person where I'm like, I don't care what it takes, So, and that poured into athletics too, where it was like, look, if I was going to go to college and be able to afford it, like I was going to have to find a way. Yep. So with that, I was like, I'm going to be good at something. I don't care what it is. I'm going to outwork everybody and we'll get there.
I remember mine that is different but similar was in high school. And I always talk about it too, is like, I mean, my parents were terrible parents.
Yeah.
I always had a house to go home to, and I was for the most part provided for, right? Just because we didn't have all the nice things was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there are moments. I mean, so like when we were in high school, and it seemed like every single thing you got into, you had to have new every year of everything, right? So, and when I was, I think I was a sophomore. No, I would have been a junior in high school. It comes time to order new shooter shirts for basketball. And of course you got to get new shoes because you can't wear the same ones you wore last year and all that stuff. And I mean, that was always my money, my personal money from the job I was working in high school that I had to spend that stuff with. And I just remember one of my friends, like we were at our coach's desk, and I can't remember if it was like $50 for shooter shirts or what it was, but like wrote a check out of my personal checkbook and like gave it to him. And by that time, I didn't even really think anything of it. Yeah. I was already kind of like, I mean, from 5 years old, kind of just molded into, I'm going to be the person I create type of thing.
Yeah.
But I just remember getting looks from other people like that's his own money. Like,
just
kind of that weird vibe. Basketball camps were the same way.
Yep.
Like that shit was all my own money.
I love that.
So, but it's relatable. I think the interesting part of that though is if we would have looked back on those times and been like spiteful because of it, or envious of these other kids because they had that, or their parents, or if that energy is any way negative, then you probably just don't turn out to be shit, right?
Yeah. And you see that, right? Like you see so many people that are a product of their situations that, it eats them up, and it runs them down. But, my thought was always like, at the end of the day, if I got through that and found a way to be successful, like for everybody else that's competing with me, like good luck.
Yeah.
Because if I made it through that, like you're not getting in my way to accomplish what I want to accomplish. So that's where I say like there's this balance of me that like one part of me is hyper competitive and was like confident, like you're not going to outwork me for this. Like I'm going to find a way to do it. But I'll also put it on the table to say like, look, here's how I'm doing it. And like if you're willing to like hold the pace and push, come along.
You can also win too.
You can do it too, right?
Was there people that provided more, like friends you had kind of growing up, like through that middle school, like in the high school phase, where maybe their family was a little bit more stable that you kind of adhered to a little bit to just have that sense of normalcy every once in a while?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So I keep going back to like my original thing is I want to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And one of my best friends, both of his parents were doctors.
Okay.
And so, because I'm always like, why did I want to be a doctor? Why was I so dead set on this? And in hindsight, his parents were just like two of the like brightest lights in my life.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think they were just that thing I held in my head as like the picture of success. Yep. And so, I did all of that and was going through applying for medical school and all that stuff. Ended up getting this job in med device, and all of a sudden was like getting a paycheck. And I was like, oh, maybe that's what I was searching for, right? Like I just
Yeah.
wanted to be okay.
Right. Right.
Um, and as I've matured and aged, like I think that was the piece that was just like they loved their son, they were present, they
Yeah.
were at every athletic event, like they gave so much of themselves and financially and all this stuff that it wasn't a career.
Mm.
It was just like that lifestyle that they had built that yeah, that was definitely like why I positioned them where I did.
It's
So
funny how you can tie different things together. And so I had a principal when I was in high school, and as I'm kind of like fighting internally with sophomore year in high school, I kind of have this like rebellious phase. I even quit basketball, which is like my favorite sport ever, because I was
yeah.
just like my buddy and I would like piss at the coach, and
Yeah.
just like I just had this weird like year where I kind of was angry, like not really angry, but just like bitter, like had this weird chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
But it's like, are you really doing anything, Derek? Like looking back at it,
Yeah.
that like that was that time of my childhood where I just kind of like cuffed myself
It's
upside the
probably
head.
like
But
hormones.
yeah, yeah, it could be just like
Yeah.
natural puberty things, I guess.
Yeah.
But I do remember later on that I formed a pretty good relationship with my principal at the time, and and I thought, so for me in my world, I've always loved finances, always loved math, numbers, and just figuring out how to make things work in like the financial world, or just
hmm
if you have a business, like what's your cost profit, just
Yeah.
putting all that stuff together. Um, and for me, it was always lenders and bankers, whether it be my dad when I was growing up, it's struggling in farming and different things, or my mom trying to get loans as a single parent, like not making much money. It was always the bankers like kind of turning us down, or what seemingly like held the key to the next pass
Yeah.
or the next step. And so for me, similar to your deal, I wanted to be in egg banking, like, because I had
Yeah.
the agricultural background, loved finances, and I was like, that's the best way for me to tie it together. But probably similarly, it was
Yeah.
always like that motherfucker was always the one
Yeah.
that was holding us back,
Yeah. I'm gonna be
It's like,
him.
I'm gonna be on that side of the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah.
But I remember having a conversation with my principal and just saying, I kind of want to do this after high school. I just don't know if that's the type of lifestyle I want to live, like wearing a button-up shirt every day,
hmm
being in an office. That really wasn't, I mean, I grew up redneck as hell,
Yeah.
just like love sports and
Yep.
hunting, fishing, whatever.
Yep.
So I was like, I don't know if that's what lifestyle I want to live. And all he did was ask me a question. Like I remember we were shooting hoops in the gym after lunch when it happened. And all he asked me was just like, do you mean a lifestyle with means, or like, what are you getting at?
Yeah.
And essentially all he was saying was just make sure you do something that you can afford to do the things you want to do
Yeah.
and support your family, whatever.
Right.
But he just said it in such a subtle way, but I mean, still to this day, obviously, just
Yeah.
always made me think like,
When I think, yeah, I think like, especially when you're young, right? Like I know I was a product of it. Where I was like, I just want to make money.
Yep.
And I got into like, I got into med device and it was like blinders on, like this is the best way and only way to make money.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you get a little life experience and you meet people and you see people doing things and it's like, there are a million ways to make money in this world. So like you gotta pick something that like checks all your other boxes, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're young, you have no idea.
You don't. I mean,
Um,
especially.
And it's like, how do you teach a 16-year-old like, dude, stop worrying about it so much. Like
Mhm.
figure out what you love. And there is almost always a path to make money with
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think about that, like with raising kids, just how to, I mean, I try not to obsess over it because it's sort of one of those things like, can I control it or not? I mean, you sort of can with your approach to how you decide to parent, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried to some extent that I want my kids to be motivated, right?
Yeah. Right.
So,
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like I thrive off the fact that we went through struggle
yeah,
to some extent. And so, I mean, we were just talking about this last weekend is like, if you are raising kids in a blessed area where like financially they don't struggle or, they don't come from a challenging home life or whatever it is, like, how do you create resiliency within,
right.
within that generation of kids? And, I don't know that I have the answer to that. Right.
Yeah, I think for us, I don't either. But what we have tried to intentionally start doing, and my fiance like really, really honed in on. So my stepdaughter's 9, Axel, my oldest, is 5, and then Berkeley's 4. And what she started doing is just simple stuff like taking your plate and stuff to the counter when you're done.
Yeah.
Like those little things.
Yep.
And what I've really noticed with Axel now at 5 is he seems to be aware a little bit more of kind of what's going on around him. Like, oh, I do need to pick this up. Or if he sees something on the floor, he'll grab it and take it to the garbage.
Yeah.
And I see that stuff and I'm like, yeah, dude. Like,
yeah.
Like, I can't even take credit for it, but like, that's it. You know? So I try to just encourage it when I see it.
Right. You know? Yeah. Our daughter's in Montessori school, which they're all like very much like, when you meet with them for the first time, they're like, I know this is your baby, but like, we're going to expect a lot out of her.
Okay.
And I mean, within a week of her coming home, she was like putting her shoes away, like cleaning up her area, like putting dishes away. And we were like, she's 2. What is she doing? How does she know how to do this stuff? And it's just like, they just expect more. Yep. And the kids crave structure and instruction. And, you know, I mean, we honestly, as adults, like most people do too. Like you want to be challenged, you want to be pushed. So I think it's just human nature, but it's funny to see that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the other layer of it that we wrestle with is like, okay, you know, I know in my upbringing, it was kind of like, you go to college or you aren't shit type thing. Right. And so like, I think college was good for me. Like I think I probably got the most out of just like the athletics side of it, where I was like, just, you know.
Did you go to UNI?
I went to Iowa State.
Yep.
So it was just like taught me some grit, where it's like, you know, you're gonna go through some hard shit and some practices and structuring your day, balancing classes, balancing travel. I got a ton out of that. But it's funny, like in my life now, like I don't use a whole lot of organic chemistry. You know, so it's like I don't even know how relevant that stuff was, and I don't know 20 years from now how relevant it's going to be at all.
And it's like, would you change it though? Because if there were a few nuggets, at least the experience kind of made you a little bit of who you are, right?
Totally. And it was just interesting seeing these shifts in these big companies where you see the Googles, Apples, Microsofts going like, you know what, we don't need 4-year degrees. How about you just sign up and we're going to train you to be specifically what we need to be.
How old are you?
I'm 31.
31.
Yeah.
So I'm 33, graduated high school in 2009.
Yeah.
So you'd have been 11.
Yeah.
I think we were right in that bubble of, because I remember, this is another like high school moment that I feel like is just like that cookie jar thing.
Yeah.
Junior year, we had just had the military tests that they come around and like the recruiters, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you do the test and it's sort of like suits you to different things that you would maybe be successful at or whatever. You know, some kids are getting back like aerospace engineering and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not going to be theirs, you know? But anyway, we went through that exercise as a class, and then for whatever reason, the teacher at the time was just, let's go around the room and just say, you know, where you're intending to go to college, if you've thought about it, and sort of what you want to do. And I remember thinking at this time, oh boy, I don't even know if I want to go to school.
Yeah.
But I know I'm going to grind and I'm just going to work.
Yeah. Right.
That's also not a very good answer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay to, and so this is kind of a weird defining point in my life of, okay, you're motivated, but what's going to be your vehicle, you know?
Yep.
And I just remember, I'm going to go to UNI to be a teacher. I'm going to go here to be a nurse. I'm going to go here to, I don't know, you know, just all the kind of cliche things that kids are going to go to, and then they change their majors or whatever. But it got to me and I was just like, I don't think I'm going to go to college. I kind of have this business idea maybe after high school. And my teacher is just like, Derek, like you have to go to college.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I remember getting so mad that I just, you know, kind of mic dropped through my pencil at the desk. Cause like, I'm going to be more successful than any of these motherfuckers.
Right.
I literally left the room because I felt personally attacked.
Yeah. 100%.
And I shouldn't have taken it that personally, but I just did at that time because I was kind of this amped up again.
And it's okay. It's okay, right? Yeah. Like I think Goggins kind of talks about how like you have to find things to like turn into fire, right?
Yeah, true.
And I definitely do it where it's like I know like throughout my career there have been like genuinely good people that I have just painted as like villains in my head where I'm like, this guy's trying to make my family starve, so I'm gonna go take over the world.
Okay, so I'm not just a sicko then. All right, we're all a little bit sick.
So it's like I think you like sometimes have to do that, where you're like, look, like this guy's trying to make me not successful. Yeah. So like, I'm gonna double down this week. I'm gonna take it all. Yeah. You know, and we'd always joke around like with my sales team, and I'd always be like, you know, we'd be competing against people, and I'd be like, you know what? At the end of the day, like, if he's only got a little bit of business, like you're doing him a favor if you take him out of business. Like finish it off. You know? And I'm like,
no.
And I'd be like, okay, like that's really cold of me to say. Yeah. but like you gotta find little things in your own head to like push. You gotta keep pushing because it's gonna get hard, right?
And sometimes it comes across as, you know, a little bit arrogant or selfish or whatever that may be. But, you know, I cannot provide for my family and do the things that I need to do with the people around me if I don't act that way to a certain extent.
Totally.
Right? I mean, you cannot be a giver if you don't have things to give.
Right.
You know,
so I mean, at the end of the day, if they quit and they're good people, then join the team.
Yeah, no,
so.
I do think it's funny though, because I look back at myself sometimes like in that setting from a 10,000 foot view. It's just like, dude, chill out.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, like there's a lot of good memes out there of like kids listening to like rap songs about troubled stuff. And I'm like picturing me like, man, life's so hard right now in Pella, Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I just had a rediscover the 2000s playlist that's on Amazon, and I turned that on the other day, and Limp Bizkit My Way came on, and I was just in my truck at a stoplight, like just ripping like I was 14 again. But,
like break stuff.
Yeah. It's like,
Everybody
okay,
sucks.
like, you know, Derek, I don't know why I was listening to that stuff when I was.
Yeah,
I mean, to that point though, you're right. I mean, you do have to just kind of channel whatever's there and find an edge somehow.
Yep.
You know, so.
100%.
Well, awesome, dude. Do you have any other like questions for me, or just thoughts that you want to make sure you get out there?
One thing that I love to ask people, especially my business owners, is I think the common question that everybody gets, like, what's the best thing you learned that you did well? But also I would say like as just like a general business practice, like what's one thing you learned in the beginning of your business that you didn't do well? And that now like in hindsight, you're like, hey, if I started it back over, here's the thing I'd change.
Yeah. So 2-part question, just one thing that we thought did go well and then didn't.
Yep.
For sure, the thing that just has gone well was my approach to, it's one thing of how much business you do, but how you conduct that business to me has always been so important. You talked about, you know, the insurance industry, and it's not the sexiest thing in the world. And when I got into the construction industry, you know, that's not the sexiest thing in the world, but you find ways to make it your own and make it unique. And I did from almost the very beginning. I mean, the guys, when I was pounding nails on a labor crew, the electricians that we worked with a lot, they always called me Hollywood, which is kind of where like the Showtime thing came from.
Yeah.
I had backwards hat, aviators on all the time.
Yeah.
7 o'clock in the morning, radio is the first thing to go. We're blaring, like we're going, you know? And I think that energy has just served me well, and people around me feed off of it. Now that can be detrimental. And so this is where I'll kind of turn to the second part of your question is, I very early on would just exhaust myself in order to make things fly, without probably paying attention to the personal toll that it was taking on me. It's not that it's a split personality situation, but there is sort of Derek Lyons, the Showtime professional figure now.
Yep.
And there's a certain expectation of like the heat we bring, the fire we bring, and people enjoy doing business with us because we're people that people want to be around, and we have this like let's go type of energy. But what I really at this point in my career, especially, need to start honing in on is probably Derek Lyons as a person a little bit.
Yeah,
bringing up some of those memories, like actually dealing with stuff instead of just compartmentalizing.
Yeah,
and then how do I, with my personal relationships around me, my fiance, my kids, how do I sort of, while I'm working through that, make sure that all that stuff still jives?
Yeah. So, I love that. Great answer.
So yeah, not all of it necessarily professional related, but that is,
it's a very real piece of all of it. So
the human factors.
Yeah. Love it.
But yeah. Well, cool, man. I'm really glad you came over.
Yeah. Thank you. This was great.
We can, we'll call that a wrap.
Perfect.